I've lost count of the number of trade rumors that have been proposed in the media and on bar stools across the country. Some are intriguing, some are ridiculous. Let's have a more realistic conversation today. We've all heard about the players that may be moved or will be moved before the August 1st trade deadline. But if you were a general manager of one of the NL Central franchises, what players on your roster would you consider untouchable? Time to open the files with Central Intelligence to see what clues we've discovered. You've been recruited to join forces and learn more about the top news and stories from the NL Central. Right here on Central Intelligence, a Slasher Sports baseball podcast presented by Slasher Sports and always available on our YouTube channel and our Spotify podcast feed. I am Special Agent for NL Central Affairs and your host, Steve Feck. Follow the podcast on social media at Slasher Baseball. Share your comments and show suggestions via email, slasherbaseball@yahoo.com. And be sure to join the growing Slasher Sports community on Discord so we can keep these types of conversations going all week, every week. You can do even more spying by visiting slashersports.com. Check out not only the baseball content, our collegiate sports contract, Slasher U with Christian Rao, Slasher Sports Cinema, hosted by the aptly named Billy Graves, and lifestyle content from Suki Suburbia, Suki's Honeydew Podcast. But wait, there's more. Slasher Sports Baseball also analyzes the American League every weekend in our AL Slash Lines podcast. Yours truly handles the hosting duties. I'm wrinkled, yet wise, so I can handle both leagues. Episode 3 drops this Sunday. Well, enough of all the shameless self-promotion here. Welcome to another episode of Central Intelligence. My name again is Steve Feck. You can follow on social media at Slasher Baseball. We, of course, will do some background checks. We're going to keep the background checks pretty simple here because I really want to get to the meat of this podcast sooner rather than later. Of course, we're going to talk about the untouchable pitcher and untouchable hitter on each NL Central team. I'm going to assume the role of GM. I'm going to invite you to do the same. Certainly during the course of the week, as you're listening to the podcast feed, as you're watching on the YouTube channel, there are comment sections there. Please share your thoughts. You don't have to agree with us. We're not asking you to agree with us. We're asking you to listen and sort of form your own opinions. Think for yourselves. Okay, we don't pretend to be experts. We know our baseball, but we don't pretend to be experts here. Okay, this is a community. We want conversations. We want open and honest conversations. It's okay if you call me an idiot. Just explain to me why I'm an idiot. And that shouldn't be that hard, really. When you think about it, it should be a relatively easy task to do. Our background checks, we're going to take a look at what each team in the NL Central's record is as we record, what they've done over the last 10 or so days since the All-Star break ended. And then we're going to sort of take a look at some rather quirky things about how they're matching up against each other as far as the NL Central teams. We'll start at the top of the division in the Milwaukee Brewers. They're 56-45. They're 7-3 in the 10 games they played since the All-Star break in the second half here. Overall, you have to say the Brewers really took care of business. They took care of the Reds, in the series coming out of the All-Star break. They are playing them as we record this as well. So, the Brewers are doing what they needed to do, what I think all Brewer fans and most MLB fans and analysts have been saying. They've got to take care of business with the teams that they need to try to hold off in order to win the division. There were some really interesting numbers that popped up here. And one is so puzzling. I'm going to save it till we go over the other thing. The Brewers are 4-3 with a +3 run differential against the Cubs. They are 9-2 as we record and a +13 run differential against the Reds. That's the team really that they need to hold off. The Reds have been just terrific. They just haven't been able to solve the Brewers so far. I think it's because of the more veteran more crafty nature of the starting rotations there in Milwaukee. But certainly the Brewers bullpen has been just lights out against everybody, really, but specifically against the Reds. They're 5-1 over the Pirates. I mean, they always have a winning record against the Pirates. They're plus 14. With the Cardinals, they've split the 6 games they've played so far, 3-3. Somehow, they have a minus 16 run differential when they're playing the Cardinals. Now, that's going to account a lot for their Pythagorean record, which has them 1 game below 500 because of the run differential. But you don't want to be minus 16 against any opponent, no matter how long the series might be. But against the, no longer cellar-dwelling St. Louis Cardinals. Good job, Cardinals. Good job, Cardinal fans, being patient, hanging in there. The St. Louis Cardinals have pulled themselves out of the NL Central basement. I mean, nice job there. I mean, you could have easily just rolled over and played dead. I mean, you still have a fork in your back. Your season's done. It's over. But, I mean, kudos to you here in the second half. You've jumped out pretty well. We'll talk a little bit more detail about that as we go through the background checks. So the Brewers, if you're 7-3 coming out of the All-Star break, you got to be feeling pretty good about yourself. You're taking care of the Cincinnati Reds as you need to. So we'll see. I mean, and they've played well against the Braves too. So let's see what happens here. Let's see what's going to be going on as you continue on here. But the Brewers have to be feeling pretty good about their chances in the division now that they're putting a little bit of distance between themselves and the Reds. Speaking of whom, they're 55-47. They're a game and a half behind Milwaukee. They're 5-6 since the All-Star break. A lot of that is at the hands of the Milwaukee Brewers, as we just talked about. So, I mean, it's not a complete picture, but certainly you would hope the Reds would have fared a little bit better against their division rival now. Because, I mean, for 2023, it's the Brewers and Reds, and everybody else is just kind of playing for a variety of goals and a variety of measuring sticks as far as what their success is for the season. They're 4-1 against the Cubs. So they're going to be playing the Cubs a lot here later in August and September. They have a +9 run differential against them. I can see the Reds doing well against the Cubs. Their aggressive style, I think, does not play to the strengths of their pitchers not named Marcus Stroman or Justin Steele. So that's a good sign. Being 2-9 against the Brewers, that's a bad sign. There's a bad moon on the rising, like Creedence Clearwater Revival used to sing. You really can't correct it. I mean, their season series is almost over, thanks to the ridiculous, let's everybody play everybody, It's a small world after all. Everybody kumbaya-ing. Everybody's getting to play everybody. It's bad on pennant races. It's cute in April and May. It's bad when it comes down to the dog days of summer after, coming up with the trade deadline, and then August and September. Bad idea, but that's for a different podcast. They have a losing record against the Pirates as well. They're 2-5. They're only a -1 run differential against the Pirates, though. So, the games they're losing, I mean, they're playing close games, and then they're also the 2 games that they won. They beat up the Pirates pretty good as far as putting runs on the board and keeping the Pirates off the scoreboard. So that's helping even that out. And they're 4-3 against the Cardinals. So the good news is Cubs and Cardinals, technically the 2 closest teams behind them. They have winning records against. They're faring well against. And, they're going to be done with the Brewers. So now they can focus on wreaking havoc against the rest of the National League and the American League teams they play as we go down the stretch. The Reds, as we record this, the Brewers and the Reds would both be in the playoffs in the National League. Reds would be the wild card. Who would have thunk that? Who would have said, or would have bet money there's going to be 2 teams coming out of the NL Central this year in the playoffs? Nobody, including myself, who's been doing this podcast about the NL Central, for the majority of the baseball season. Nobody saw that happening. So once again, this is why it's the most interesting and fun division to cover and to follow as a baseball fan, the NL Central, and it's only going to get better, folks, in the coming years. We'll continue to review the reasons for that on future episodes of Central Intelligence. The Cubs, as we talked about, have an up and down relationship with their division mates. I mean, for them, their World Series is they're leading the series against the Cardinals 5-4, plus 11 run differential. They play each other one more series. If they can win that series, then Cubs have something, and their Cubs fans have something to where they can kind of lick through wounds a little bit. Said, yeah, but at least we took care of the Cardinals. And the rivalry between the Cubs and the Cardinals really is in the stands, and on sports talk radio. It's not as intense as it had been for all of the years, prior. We talked about it a little bit last week about a lot of the, unnecessary slurping between teams, especially in pre-games. There's so much movement now. You've got teammates in almost every, former teammates in almost every team. What can you do? Yeah, it's just it's what baseball is now. It's not what I grew up with. It's not what I would prefer, but it's not something to make a federal case out of. So Cubs taking care of that. Everybody talks about how the Cubs have the best run differential. There's something called the simplified rating system. You'll see that on baseballreference.com. And they're the only team in the NL Central, the Cubs, with a positive simplified rating system. And it really is runs scored versus runs allowed. But a big reason that they are the only team with a positive SRS is not only the fact that they're 6-0 against the Pirates, they are a plus 34 against the Pirates. That is just crazy. I didn't go back and try to pick through every single year and about how a certain team had that kind of dominance. I'm sure in expansion years there's a lot of that, but plus 34, and they're still going to meet 6 more times before the end of the season. So we'll see how the Cubs can cushion that simplified rating system rating that they do have. But that's where a lot of it comes from, folks. That's when Jed Hoyer and the front office is looking at it realistically about should we really sell or should we buy at the deadline? That's what they're looking at. They're looking at the fact that, we have a healthy run differential, but it's at the expense of the Pirates and really the Pirates only. Though they've done a decent job with the Cardinals. And speaking of the Cardinals, Cubs are 48-51. Cardinals are 45-56. They're 11 games back, 4 and back of the Cubs. So if you want to look for that little sub-pennant race, if you will, within the division between the rivals. Cardinals, as we said, they're 7-4 coming out of the All-Star break. So they're 1 game better than the Cubs coming out of the All-Star break. They have the second best winning percentage in the division since the All-Star break. And it has to make the fans, the best, most loyal fans in the country are fans of the St. Louis Cardinals. And they are very much a regional fan base, thanks to their extensive radio network. It's a little bit different now with expansion and all, but really the Cardinals learned how to do the radio network stuff going back to Branch Rickey and back into the 30s when radio really was king in the 30s and 40s. So that's where they got such a loyal fan base, and that fandom gets passed down from generation to generation, very much like you have in Chicago with the Cubs. It's pretty amazing how that the Cardinal fans, pretty much any city that you go to, there's a good contingent of Cardinal fans there. And I'm not necessarily saying that they travel from St. Louis, but because of their regional draw, you've got fans, in Atlanta, in Chicago, Kansas City, Minnesota. There's so many places where the Cardinals fans are there. The plus 16 run differential against the Brewers. Again, it's another one of those cases that's with the Cubs and with the difference against the Pirates. I mean, that's kind of filled their nest, if you will, as far as run differential, even though they have a negative run differential, as a whole against teams. But that's got to make them feel pretty good that the team that they've been battling over the last couple of years for division supremacy, it's got to make them feel good that they have that kind of, even though they only have 3 wins in the 6 games, that they've been able to handle them pretty well, that their offense has just been getting things together against the Cardinals. And then we have my hometown Pittsburgh Pirates. They're 3-7 since the All-Star break. They're on a West Coast swing where they've played okay. They've been gotten into some slugfests, and their pitching has let them down to a certain degree. But again, they're bringing so many more young arms into the mix in Pittsburgh as they are with the position players. You're not really going to be measuring the success in the win and loss column, not to get all Ted Lasso on you, but you're not really going to measure that success there. You're going to be looking at how are these players, Henry Davis, Andy Rodriguez, Uber Peguero, all of the young kids, Nick Gonzalez that they're bringing up, and they're going to continue to work into the lineup. Your young Quinn Priester, some other young pitchers that are going to be rotating in and out, throughout the second half of the year. How are they advancing? How are they developing? They have winning records against the Reds and the Cardinals, losing records against the Cubs and the Brewers, and it hasn't really been competitive in the case of the Cubs and the Brewers. But again, that's some of it's a carryover from their hot start, in April and early May. But the Pirates, they're not going to be a 500 club. I have said this multiple times. If they're 72-90, that's a 10-game improvement. My guess is, as the young players get their balance and get their feet under them a little bit more, you're going to see them pushing maybe closer to 75 wins as opposed to just 72 wins. And that might not seem like a lot over a 162 game schedule. I think for the Pirates and for these young players that they have, it's going to mean the world to them. So that's the background check, for the week. As I've said before, we're going to be looking at this pennant race, and really it's a divisional race with 2 teams involved, because I think the Cubs are going to move Marcus Stroman and some other valuable pieces. The Cardinals have already said they're going to be trading a lot of players. The Pirates are going to be bringing in a lot of talents, a la the Cincinnati Reds. But I mean, the Reds players and the Reds talent are far more advanced. They're at least a year ahead of the Pirates on the development cycle. I think that the teardown in Cincinnati was not as drastic as it was with Pittsburgh. But we're going to look at things like divisional record. It's not as important anymore, but the fact is, like, the Brewers and Reds will no longer play each other, the rest of the year. They have to depend on how they do against other teams. We'll try to pick out quirky things within divisional records. Not every episode, but we'll take a look at it. Maybe we'll get back to breaking down a couple of series coming up this weekend and talk about various points and various good points and bad points that you can take out of whatever series that we're going to cover. Now we're going to get to the heart of the order, as a colleague of mine often says in her podcast. And we're going to talk about untouchables. I mean, the trade deadline can be so dreadfully redundant on so many levels, and it's fine, and it is fun, except that when you have like networks, let's say ESPN or even MLB Network, that take the same topic and they, over the course of all of their shows, they go over and over and over again on the topics. I do recommend, if you do have Sirius XM satellite radio, that you do listen to MLB network radio. I think they do a much better job at attacking fresh topics from show to show. So I do. They're not paying us for this plug. I might have to build them, see what happens with that. But I think that would be a really a real good step for you. I think it'll be a nice breath of fresh air. Yes, they're still talking about rumors and, oh, where's Shohei Ohtani going to go? I mean, where's Marcus Stroman going to go? But there's way more players than just the big names that are going to get moved here. And for the sake of simplifying and legitimizing really our conversations today, I think it's going to be important to cap the expanse of who each front office should deem as untouchable. Again, this is an exercise. I'm going to tell you, as the general manager of the various teams that in the division that we're going to talk about, who I would put the untouchable tag on. But hopefully during the course of the week and the course of the coming weeks, as you come back and maybe you haven't come across Central Intelligence podcast before, maybe you're just hearing through the grapevine, how we approach this here as far as covering the NL Central. It's more of the stories than just breaking news or trades or whatever. We like to kind of get behind the scenes and look at various stories here. But we put kind of two caveats on our discussion here. Anybody that we deem as untouchable needs to be on the 40-man roster right now. Now, we do understand here at Central Intelligence that a lot of prospects at the lower levels of the minor leagues who will be moved at this deadline are not, they don't have the service requirements where they have to be put on the 40-man roster or be made available in a Rule 5 draft. But we're just trying to keep it. I think it's really hard to guess accurately what kind of lower level prospects might be in any kind of a deal. So rather than looking at them, I think we want to look at players on the 40-man roster, people that would be the most major league ready. Theoretically, it's going to vary from organization to organization, but I think when you want to look at it that way, and then we're also going to avoid trying to classify as untouchable players with no trade clauses. So no Seiya Suzuki, with the Cubs. Not that I think that they would be trading Suzuki, nor I think it would be a disaster for them to trade Suzuki. But, Christian Yelich in Milwaukee, Brian Reynolds in Pittsburgh, Nolan Arenado in St. Louis. None of these guys are going to get moved at the deadline. There's talk of Arenado. I would be super shocked if Nolan Arenado was moved. As much as John Mozeliak has been talking about players are going to be traded, I just don't see Arenado being the case. And I think because Yelich has kind of found himself, he's made that adjustment with that, that little toe tap rather than the exaggerated, leg lift, at the plate. That seems to have really worked for him. So I don't think he's going to go either. We're going to do it alphabetically. I'm going to put the hat on of every team here so that we can make it seem as realistic as possible. I'm a shadow GM, if you will. I'm not the real GM, but I'm that guy that's going to maybe be whispering in the ears of each of the general managers and kind of throw ideas about that. Hey, look, you really can't trade these guys. So we're going to start with the Chicago Cubs. Nico Hoerner. He's an infielder by trade. Really, he's a Swiss Army knife player. With the signing long-term of Dansby Swanson in Chicago, that means Hoerner's not going to be playing shortstop much, except when he's resting, filling in for Swanson, who needs a rest or whatever. But the good news about that, and I don't think anybody in the Cubs organization had any doubts about it, Nico Hoerner has made a seamless transition to second base. He and Swanson have a chance to be a Sandberg, DeJesus type of middle infield. I really like how these two players have started to develop almost like a second nature, no look approach to handling double plays, of see who's covering bases, all the things that you expect out of your middle infield duo. And you don't appreciate what that kind of a duo does, both as individuals and in the collective, for your team, unless you're looking closely at the box scores of each. They play together, you know, and their contributions are in the lines of the box score. You're not going to see it in analytical breakdowns or projections or even in highlights. It's in the box score. So to really appreciate guys like Nico Horner, you need to look at the box score every day. I'd be comfortable putting him at third, not necessarily every day, but he can play third. And honestly, with all of the middle infield prospects that the Cubs have knocking on the door that probably aren't that far away, I can envision him making a Craig Biggio kind of transformation into a center fielder from the infield, from second base. I don't know how quickly they would ask him to do that. But I think it's, he reminds me a little bit about Craig Biggio as far as his approach to the game. Now, it was hard for me to not make Ian Happ my untouchable for the Cubs. I had the privilege to coach against him, as an amateur and his high school teams. He's a switch hitter, which is another nice little thing to have. He is older than Nico Horner by a couple of years. He is an ARB3 player this year. He's already making $10.85 million. Horner's only making $2.35 million in his first year of eligibility. So the 2 more controllable years, more payroll flexibility, if you will, over the next couple of years. I think Horner is going to play a more valuable role long-term than Ian Happ. I didn't want emotions to take over here. I wanted to look at it objectively. And I really think that Nico Horner is going to be the untouchable hitter on the 40-man roster for the Cubs. I don't think there's any young players that are that close to the majors that I would add in there. I think the Matt Mervis experiment failed. They're going to have to make some adjustments to see if he's going to be a regular first baseman. They have another first base prospect, on the 40-man. His defensive WAR, considering he bounces all over the place, including the outfield, is 2.0. And when you add his 3.1 offensive average WAR to the equation, Nico Horner is going to contribute to the future successes in Wrigley Field, more so than any player that would not involve a no trade, like with say a Suzuki that we said earlier. Now, the untouchable pitcher in Chicago is Justin Steele. He's a left-handed starter. He's 27 years old. So in theory, he's more of a finished product at this point. The Cubs have had him up before. I don't think they haven't tried to push the envelope because the Cubs didn't need him to step in and assume a major rotation role right away. He kind of was able to get his feet wet a little bit. He's broken out in 2023. He's 10-3, 2.95 ERA across 18 starts. He's pitched 103 2/3 innings. Now, prospect junkies will tell you that Palencia at 23 and Assad at 25, especially Assad, have higher ceilings, perhaps. I'll tell you that Assad at 25 is not as polished as Justin Steele is at 27. But, bottom line is they have not pitched in the majors yet. Steele has already shown what he's capable of against major league hitters. He's already posted a career WAR of 5.5 across the 3 seasons. And in limited duty, really. He pitched last year. He pitched in 24 games at 3.18 ERA. He averages about a strikeout an inning. He's not like blowing up, the scoreboard with the number of strikeouts, but 1 an inning. Okay, that's good. And then, did I mention he's a reliable left-handed option? I think that sets him aside and makes him that much more special. His all-star teammate, Marcus Stroman, came out and lobbied for Steele's addition to the all-star team after Stroman decided that he should not participate for a variety. There was some injury concerns, but I think he just wanted the breather. And that's high praise indeed. Steele's the real deal. So Jed Hoyer, you can't consider any trade offers that involve Nico Horner or Justin Steele. Of course, next alphabetically, Cincinnati Reds. It can be argued that virtually nobody on the major league roster should be touched, should be made available in deals. And, I agree in about maybe 7 of the 9 guys in their regular lineup. They should not even be thought of as trade bait. We'll go into that here in a little bit. But I had to keep going back for these untouchable designations, not so much for the pitcher. So we'll start with Andrew Abbott. Anyone who had the opportunity to watch Abbott pitch at the University of Virginia came away with the impression this guy is going to anchor a major league staff. The nice thing about Abbott landing in Cincinnati is he does not need to be the ace. Hunter Green is probably the guy that you would give that designation to, but I would maybe put Abbott as a 1A. Not necessarily this year, but I wouldn't argue very hard if you said that Abbott is the stat base this year, especially since Hunter Green's out until August, with his hip injury. He was a 36th round pick by the Yankees coming out of high school in South Boston, Virginia. And he made himself into a 2nd round pick of the Reds in the 2021 draft. If the Reds were in a position like they are this year, contending for a division title in the NL Central, I have no doubt that Nick Krall would have considered bringing him up in September. Fortunately for his development, Abbott was able to get a complete year in for 2022 in the minors. He dazzled in early 2023 at Louisville before he got promoted on June 5th. And when he got promoted June 5th, he hurled a 2-0 shutout against the Milwaukee Brewers, one of the few wins the Reds have posted against their 2023 division rivals. But what makes Abbott untouchable as the pitcher is twofold. He's not a power pitcher. I mean, he can blow a ball by you, but he's not going to really rely on that. And for his first 3 years at Virginia, he was a reliever. He was one of the best relievers in the country as a sophomore and a junior, truth be told. Because the 2020 pandemic draft was shortened and was such a weird scenario about how you tried to rate players that didn't have complete seasons, he went undrafted. And I think that surprised a lot of people. It certainly surprised Abbott. And I think he admittedly had said that he was a little down about not getting drafted in 2020. But the sunny side of this topic is that he developed a killer changeup to pair with his fastball curveball combo. So this allowed him to start and be effective as a starter for the first time as a collegiate. And voila, he was missing bats. He was throwing more strikes. In his 9 starts this year, he struck out 57 and crossed 55 and 2/3 innings. He's 5-2, I believe. Yeah, he's 5-2, 2.10 ERA, and it's a no-brainer for me. Even when you consider Green and Nick Lodolo are in the Reds rotation when healthy, I think Abbott would be the pitcher you have to say is untouchable. Primarily because of what he did after the disappointment of the 2020 draft, despite having a wonderful year as a reliever, as a junior, coming back, developing that changeup, starting to throw more strikes, and not letting it totally get him down. He didn't get an attitude. He didn't mope around. He just worked harder. He turned himself into a very, very effective starter his senior year at Virginia. And now he's doing the same here with the Reds. I'm almost afraid to say this when we talk about the hitter. And you can call me crazy, but before you hit the stop button, on the audio podcast or on the YouTube channel, I want you to hear me out when I tell you that Matt McLain would get my designation as the untouchable bat for the Reds over Elly De La Cruz. And I mean, again, if you put in any comment sections after you listen and watch this Central Intelligence episode, and you give me all kind of hell for this, I get it. I get it. I just let me state my case here before you call to have me committed. Okay. And I want to state very clearly and emphatically in my best Jersey Shore vernacular, Ellie De La Cruz is fucking amazing. To be honest, except for Jonathan India and Will Benson, there are no Reds currently seeing regular at-bats that I would trade from this team. But again, for this exercise, we're picking one pitcher and one hitter. And so again, you're looking at Hunter Green, as being the ace of the Reds, if you will, and the perceived future ace as well. It doesn't mean that he's a worse player than Andrew Abbott. I just think that Andrew Abbott, because of his very high floor and his ability to maybe break through his ceiling, because he just keeps getting better, I think Andrew Abbott's untouchable. I think Matt McLain is the untouchable guy for the Cincinnati Reds. Ellie De La Cruz is going to make more highlights. He's going to have more posters. His rookie card will be worth more money probably. But he suffers, in my eyes, from Sotoitis. There came a point in Juan Soto's career in Washington that it became apparent that the Nationals would not pay the market value to lock up Soto long term. So he got moved to San Diego for a slew of major league ready prospects that are already making the Nationals better. Now, based on the trajectory that De La Cruz has launched himself into in a very small sample size, and speaking of trajectories, I would be remiss if I did not mention the homer he crushed in the series opener in Milwaukee this week. I mean, it was just awe-inspiring, a jaw-dropping moment. And it's not the last one that De La Cruz is going to have in a Cincinnati Reds uniform. He still needs to get rid of that 44. They really do need to retire that for Eric Davis. But again, that has nothing to do with my analysis here. Just another aside, something else I've been rallying for here on Central Intelligence all season. Now, while the Nationals theoretically had the revenue streams to have signed Soto to the type of contract that he's going to sign once he hits free agency, Cincinnati Reds do not. Their market size is much smaller. And even having an ownership stake in what is, at least for now, Bally Sports Ohio, which means that they have, not controlling interest, but they have preference as far as where their games are being seen, even regionally. I mean, there are some strange demarcations between where you can see Indians games on Bally Sports Ohio and where you can see Reds games. There's some really unusual things there. But even having that ownership stake, like the Nationals have in Masson, the Reds are not going to benefit as much as, let's say, the Nationals could have from their regional sports network revenue. So I'm already nervous about what that could mean down the road. Since for this exercise, we're only picking one bat that should be deemed by Nick Krall and his front office as untouchable, I'm anointing shortstop Matt McLain as the untouchable on the Reds roster. Again, I would not trade 7 of the 9 regulars. But McLain has staked his claim to the starting shortstop job for the next decade. He has improved upon his can't-miss tools from the time that he was playing college ball at UCLA. And really, it was his promotion on May 15th from Louisville to the Reds that jump-started the Reds season. McLain has stabilized the Reds infield defense. He's not Ozzie Smith. He may never win a Gold Glove. He gets to the balls he needs to get to. He makes the throws he has to get to. When you add to that, he has an O-WAR, according to Baseball Reference, of 5.9. That's all-star territory, folks. Once you get above 5, Now you're talking an all-star caliber player. As flashy and as fun as Ellie De La Cruz is, Matt McLain is steady and clutch. And if the Reds are serious about moving India for a frontline starter, as has been rumored over the last 7 to 10 days or so, McLain becomes even more important. He is that anchor in the middle of that infield that is going to make a long-term difference in Cincinnati. When you factor in controllability, when you factor in, I think, the grit and the blue-collar approach to the game that McLain has, the fact that he gets the big hits, he's probably going to spend the majority, if not all of his career in Cincinnati. So he's my choice. I think it would be Nick Kral's choice too. If you put him up to a lie detector test, and had him answer honestly who would be the one offensive player that you would consider untouchable, I think Nick Kral's results would show that any answer other than Matt McLain would be considered a lie. Now, before we move on to the next team, allow me to remind you to join the conversations here on social media at Slasher Baseball. So that includes, Twitter, Instagram. We have our own Facebook group now for Slasher Baseball, as do all of the Slasher programs options that are out there. You can follow on the Spotify feed, list your comments there on our YouTube channel. I'm just starting this conversation. It's up to you all to keep it going. And I'm there every day. I'm not going to be up at 4 a.m. Eastern time to answer your question. You might need to wait till 6. Okay, but as soon as I see it, I'm going to answer it as honestly and as directly as I can. And don't be surprised if I throw questions out there to you. I'm going to learn as much from you as you're going to learn from me on this podcast. So let's go to the Milwaukee Brewers, division-leading Milwaukee Brewers. Now, I'm old enough, as you can tell here, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, you can see that I'm old enough to remember the glory days of the Brewer teams of the late 70s through the 1982 World Series appearance. When I watch the 2023 Brewers, I get the same vibes, the same feel-good vibes I did following those teams managed by George Bamberger and Harvey Keene. So I will admit that my untouchable suggestions for Matt Arnold are influenced by those, I don't want to call them childhood memories. I was really getting out of high school and then in college, when the Brewers had those glory years. It's a filter that I'm looking through when I'm making these choices. And ironically, my untouchable bat has actually been moved to the bench after the All-Star break due to his inconsistent at-bats. And that is Joey Wiemer. And I've been gushing about Wiemer since Slasher Sports started the Central Intelligence podcast earlier this season. For his glove work alone, Joey Wiemer should be written into Craig Counsell's lineup cards, even if it's in the number 9 slot, even with the raw power that he has. And he has raw power to spare. When you couple that raw power with Milwaukee's number 1 pick, Brock Wilken, who is probably going to be a regular either as a DH or playing third base, maybe even sliding over to the other corner and play first base in the middle of that Brew Crews lineup for the next half decade at least. I think Wilken will actually be a better version of Aramis Ramirez offensively, at least. Certainly not defensively. Aramis Ramirez was an underrated third baseman. And Wiemer's going to be his equal. And I think he's going to be an equal to franchise legend Gorman Thomas. Gorman Thomas struggled with his average and some chasing and striking out a lot, really all through his career, but certainly the first couple of years of his career. But defensively, he was one of the best defensive center fielders of the 70s, certainly in the American League. So you have that duo of Wilken and my man, Joey Wiemer. They're in the 3 and 4 slot, middle of the lineup. Then you've got Willie Adames and Sam Frelick, the number 1 Brewer process, leading, being at the top of the lineups and setting the table for those two. That's going to reinvent the Brewers offense. And it's going to answer and solve at least for half a decade all of the run producing concerns that so many have about the Milwaukee Brewers. And speaking of Frelick, what a great debut that he had. A great story. I still laugh every time I hear him talk about how his mom stayed home to watch the dog. They didn't have a dog sitter yet, so she missed his major league debut. That's a family that's got their priorities straight, by the way. He may be the most complete young player in the Milwaukee organization at this point, but he's not the defender Weimer is. And at 5'9", he's got some pop, but he's more of a top of the lineup on base guy. He's not going to be as sexy, chicks dig the long ball kind of player that Weimer is going to be. And the Brewers have had success drafting and developing those type of top of the lineup, or situational hitter kind of deals. They really haven't had the sluggers coming up through the system. They've had to go out and bring in Daniel Vogelback and Rowdy Tellez, to do the bopping for them. And that's just not a sustainable model. And I think that Matt Arnold is aware of that. Now, Wilkin hasn't played a game yet, so he's not on the 40-man roster, so he's not part of this discussion. If it was, he would be the guy saying you can't trade him ever. But Joey Weimer is my Brewers' untouchable position player. I did not hesitate, even for a second, in tagging Devin Williams as the untouchable arm in Milwaukee. And that is not a knock on Corbin Burnes. He's a fabulous, innings-eating, consistent, strikeout-inducing starter. But truth be told, Burnes has been pitching his way out of Milwaukee since he broke out in 2020. Burnes has earned every penny of the $10 million the Brewers are paying him after the most recent arbitration award. That price tag is only going to go up. And the financial realities of paying market value for a generational stopper like Devin Williams is simply more valuable and more logical than doing the same for inflated prices for a starter like Corbin Burnes. Milwaukee is very similar to Cincinnati in market size. Not so much revenue generation, though they do a lot of creative things as far as ticket packages and specials that bring families in. Brewer fans are coming in from parts of Minnesota, certainly parts of Michigan, parts of even Iowa, I think, but primarily from Wisconsin. They're relying on that. But really, the big monster in Wisconsin is the University of Wisconsin, even more so than the Milwaukee Bucks. The Brewers find ways to maximize that ballpark revenue. Very true. But they're not going to ever be mistaking the Brewers' payrolls with the Cubs and the Cardinals. Not ever. Even if the Brewers were in like a multi-year division winning, going to the World Series type of scenarios, that they're just not going to spend like the Cubs and Cardinals. So investing in Devin Williams long-term is going to prove more cost-effective for ownership and for baseball operations, in all honesty. He only earns $3.35 million in his first year of arbitration eligibility, and even maxing out the market value as MLB's premier closer with the best pitch in Major League Baseball, that changeup. There's just no pitch that even rivals Devin Williams' changeup. He will not earn, as far as AAV goes, to the level that will approach what Burnes will secure in the free agent market. So it is more years of control and contract peaks that earned by Williams that makes him my untouchable tag as the pitcher. And I wonder if Matt Arnold is already thinking along those lines. I bet that he is. He would love to, in a perfect situation, he would love to be able to sign Burnes to an extension before he hits the market. But really, they're doing a good job developing young pitchers. And it'll be easier, in theory, to replace Corbin Burns than it would Devin Williams. Even though they've got, that young kid Uribe that's hitting 103, 104 on a regular basis on the radar gun. So, Devin Williams eventually may move into a Josh Hader kind of a role. But for right now, the untouchable tag as far as pitchers in Milwaukee goes to Devin Williams. Now, the Pittsburgh Pirates. And this is a little bit of a story time, I guess. But, as many years as I have lived in Pittsburgh. So we're talking 46 years over 3 different stints between college and moving back for jobs and then moving back permanently. I admit that I could not really call myself a Pirates fan until Andrew McCutchen arrived at PNC Park in 2010. And I am of the generation, I'm of the belief, even with the DH being in both leagues, I believe that baseball fans should have a favorite National League team and a favorite American League team. And that their dream scenario is that your favorite NL and AL team match up in the World Series every year. And of course, that's not going to happen. But I mean, that is the dream scenario from my standpoint. When I went to work briefly for the Florida Marlins in 1992, I was adamant. I believed to my core that I would never have a reason to follow another National League roster as my favorite National League team. I was being given an opportunity, and not just, from a scouting perspective and some other things that I did. I was given the opportunity to, in essence, follow a team from game one of the franchise's existence. And by that, I mean, even before the expansion draft, I attended the first game in franchise history at a high school field in Erie, Pennsylvania, the New York Penn League's Erie Sailors, in June of 1992. So from that first pitch, from that kind of almost sitcom kind of situation where, there weren't enough locker space, visiting teams had to literally get dressed on their bus or before they got on the bus to come to the game, it was not the ideal situation. And Dave Dombrowski was very adamant about saying, no matter what people say or try to complain or make fun of, you say it's a perfect situation for our organization at this time. That was just how Dombrowski's approach. Everything was the best. Even when it wasn't, it was the best when he was building those Marlins rosters and coming up with strategy for the expansion draft leading up to that. That was Dave Dombrowski's approach. And when you have that kind of special connection to a franchise, in your heart, you know that only a moron or only a crook or only a clueless opportunist could shatter that dream scenario. And in 2002, Jeffrey Loria, after he totally sold the Montreal Expos franchise down the river, started to do the same with the Florida Marlins. Even through the early years of that, I still was resisting rooting for the Pirates, and the Pirates were in some dark times. Fortunately, they were playing in what is still the finest ballpark in North America, PNC Park. But then they started getting that resurgence. When they drafted Andrew McCutchen, I really think that things changed in the minds of a lot of Pirate fans, at least those that hadn't abandoned the franchise, because what a dumpster fire the Pirates were there, for a long time. So there is some bias when I discuss my admiration for the Pirates GM Ben Cherington. And I told you that I put him on my Mount Rushmore of GMs. Time will prove that he masterminded one of the greatest rebuilds in recent memory. The closest comp I have is really the Bobby Cox, John Shearholtz Atlanta Braves of the late 80s. And then when Cox was moved from GM to manager and Shearholtz took over, the transformation was complete. So now you've got me becoming a born-again Pirates fan, if you will. I was never really a Pirates fan. I loved Bob Moose. I saw his no-hitter in 1969 at Shea Stadium. So I always had like an interest in the Pirates. They always had a great logo, had great unis, but I wasn't a fan. But you factor in that with my admiration for Ben Cherington. I picked two untouchables that, in essence, were among Cherington's first draft classes in 2020 and 2021. Now, aside from the long-term extensions given to Brian Hayes and Brian Reynolds, putting those aside as well, the untouchables, I think, need to be people that Cherington drafted, not that he inherited per se, or that even got traded for, but players that he targeted in the draft and invested time in their development. Cherington has a history, certainly in Pittsburgh, of embracing and looking to give second chances to players that he drafted or acquired during his days in Boston and Toronto. Given that tendency, and you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing, certainly you can make arguments on either side of that. I thought, what? If Cherington's going to designate someone as being untouchable, and I don't think that there's anybody on this team that is untouchable. Silly to say, probably Andrew McCutchen may be the most untouchable guy that doesn't have a no-trade contract at this point, because of what it has meant to have McCutchen back with the Pirates, ideally for another year and not just for this year. But Cherington is not the kind of guy that's an untouchable guy. If he sees a deal that's going to improve the team, not only short term, but certainly long term, he's going to make that deal. So for the pitcher, I'm going to look at the 2020 draft, the first draft that Cherington's team oversaw. They picked Nick Gonzalez, who was with the Pirates roster now, 7th overall. And with their competitive balance pick, 31st overall, Carmen Mlodzinski was taken out of South Carolina. College pitchers are a common thread through all of the amateur drafts under Cherington, both in Boston and when he was advising in Toronto, and nowadays with Pittsburgh. And Mlodzinski is the typical prototype that he kind of looks for. He's a bigger guy, 6'2", 220. He can throw 3 pitches for strikes on a consistent basis, though his walk rate as a reliever is a little bit higher than maybe you would like. It's about 9.5. Mlodzinski seemed to profile as that mid-rotation piece that the Pirates would need as they were coming out of this teardown. He started his first 3 years in the minors, but the minor league coaches and Cherington staff saw some tendencies where they decided to, right at the beginning of the years, move him into a relief role and start him at AAA Indianapolis. He struck out 27% of the batters that he faced as a reliever over 25 2/3 innings. They had him ranked at the beginning of the year as a number 20 prospect in the organization, but I think that was based on what his future usage as a starter would be, not what he would be switching to the bullpen. And that change in roles showed that the Pirates are committed to finding the roles their picks can succeed in better, not force him into he's a first-round pick, so he has to succeed as a starter or succeed as a catcher or third baseman or wherever you want to point it to. Mlodzinski, he's seen a few leverage situations, but watching him attack hitters, I can envision him taking the 8th inning role away from Colin Holderman down the stretch here. Mlodzinski may be an accidental leverage reliever. I think down deep, every pitcher I think that ever started wants to be a starter, but I think at 24, he has the years available to him to refine that high leverage back of the bullpen role. And I say that not to give the hint that David Bednar is going to get traded this season. He's not. Unless Cherington gets absolutely blown away by an offer that's simply too good to refuse, Bednar's not going to get traded. So you can write off those rumors as well. Just like you can, Ohtani's not getting traded. There's so many players that are not going to get it. But Mlodzinski's development may pave the way for a Bednar trade for multiple major league ready pieces at next year's deadline, or adding even more depth at the lower levels of the Pirates. It's the model Cherington has followed when he built the World Series championship team as GM of the Red Sox. It's the blueprint that he encouraged Ross Atkins to follow, along with Tony LaCava during his tenure with the Blue Jays. And it's one that just might bring the first NL Central title to Pittsburgh ever. They've never won the NL Central. And that probably could happen realistically by 2025. So, yes, there's Mitch Keller. And Mitch Keller is a wonderful pitcher. For me, I'm not trading Carmen Mlodzinski under any circumstances at this stage, because I think the best is yet to come. We haven't seen the best of him yet. Now, Cherington's first shot at drafting 1-1, first pick overall, came in 2021 when he snagged Henry Davis out of Louisville. He was a catcher in college. Was he the best available player? Probably not. But he was the best fit for the Pirates and for what Cherington envisioned his future lineups to be. Davis will be an all-star in time, I think. He will not be an MVP. But he's going to be that irreplaceable lineup cog that will be successful well beyond just his original years of control. Like a Brian Reynolds, or a Joe Mauer or a Buster Posey. I use those two because, again, they stayed at the catcher position. Though Mauer moved to first, Posey had to move out from behind the plate at the end of his career. Davis, he's not going to be the most talented player on the Pirates. But like Mauer and Posey, he's going to produce in the clutch. He's going to be in the lineup 5 out of 7 days. His apparent power is not just fluky good luck. It's real. He appears to be a pretty good base runner, which surprised me a little bit. But Henry Davis doesn't look out of position in right field. And I mean, left field is a more ground to cover at PNC Park. But I think that he could eventually adapt to play left field as well. I just can't imagine a scenario in which Davis is not a productive major leaguer. And coupled with that loyalty syndrome that I talked about with Cherington that he shows to players he drafts and develops, Henry Davis might be the most untouchable position player moving forward in Pittsburgh. You may say, well, what about O'Neill Cruz? I think he needs to show more discipline, Cruz. Will he be motivated by what Ellie De La Cruz is doing in Cincinnati? Because there's so many comparisons between the two already. I think so. I think Cruz is a very prideful player, but he needs to show more plate discipline. He needs to show less out of control emotions for me. And now he's got to prove that he's fully recovered from ankle surgery. So that's why I'm slotting Davis as the untouchable for the Pirates here in 2023 and not O'Neill Cruz. But again, it's a scenario like when we talked about Cincinnati. They're not going to trade O'Neill Cruz. They're not going to trade a lot of the young pieces that are there. Gonzalez, Peguero. They're not going to trade those guys. And last in the alphabet, but certainly not last in the hearts of National League fans, especially fans of the St. Louis Cardinals, are John Mosalic's team that has had just a historically horrible season. But Mozelic has made it clear that he's going to be very active with trade talks as the deadline approaches, especially where it comes to adding starting pitching and bullpen upgrades. Players are going to get traded. That's been Mosalic's mantra now for the last month. But ironically, there is a Cardinals untouchable pitcher that Mozelic can't. He's going to be tempted, and so many people think he's the obvious guy to go. But we'll talk about him after we talk about the untouchable bat, the guy that rates, I think, highest on the untouchable scale on this St. Louis roster, on their 40-man roster. And that hitter is master tradesman Brendan Donovan. Donovan he's 26. He's pre-arbitration eligible. Right now, he's on a two-way contract, so the amount changes. He's the max, and when he's in the majors, and he's not going to the minors, is $728,000. He has logged games at second base, at first base, at left field and right field, and also on the left side of the infield. I want to focus him on the right side of the diamond because playing second base will be his primary job, I believe, very, very soon. And he's also then a reliable option at first base. Paul Goldschmidt's 35. So when he needs a day off or is DHing, you can play Donovan at first base. I think that fits his profile. And the fact that he can bounce around the lineup and around the field gives whoever the next St. Louis manager will be in 2024. And please tell me it's not going to be Oliver Marmol. I'm sorry. I think you would actually have consistent booing from St. Louis Cardinal fans if Marmol is retained after this year. But that next St. Louis manager is going to have a plethora of solid in-game options with the flexibility in that roster, with the Tommy Edman, with a Brandon Donovan that can move all over the place. You can utilize your young outfielders perhaps more effectively by being able to take him out late in games when matchups aren't favorable and have Donovan be able to move from second base to the outfield or first base or wherever he might be playing at the time. You can pinch hit for these younger players and feel confident that Donovan can slide over and play whatever position that he was asked to play in mid-game. There's a lot of value in that. Sometimes it's overstated, but I think in the case of Donovan, I think it's understated. He was a stud, and he played in relative obscurity at South Alabama, at least until regional play began for the NCAAs. Then everybody started to realize, boy, this guy is good. He's really special. He already has a 6.2 career WAR over a season and a half. And so far this year, 11 homers, 34 RBIs, and he has a slash line, 287 average, 371 on base, very good. 430 slugging, nice. 801 OPS, very nice. You add this to half a decade of team control, and that spells untouchable with a capital U. Given the Cardinals' depth in the outfield, and especially them drafting even more younger outfielders, I wouldn't say that Jordan Walker is necessarily untouchable, though I certainly wouldn't trade him at this point. I mean, I just can't imagine the scenario again where that's a good idea. So, John, just hang up or say, next player, please, if Brendan Donovan's name comes up during your trade negotiation. And another name's going to come up during these negotiations. And he's probably the number one player discussed by the media and by fans as a trade target. And that's free agent to be Jack Flaherty. For me, he's the only untouchable pitcher on the St. Louis roster. The only one on the 40-man. I understand there are lingering injury concerns from what happened last year. But you can say that about any pitcher, really, especially an innings-eating kind of starter like Jack Flaherty. Yes, he's going to be eligible for free agency this offseason. He's going to receive a significant increase over his $5.4 million salary for 2023. The Cardinals got lucky from a payroll standpoint that Flaherty got hurt. Think about this for a moment. That award was much lower than it would have been had he been the Jack Flaherty that everybody remembered, certainly from 2021 on. If the Cardinals double Jack Flaherty's salary and project it out over 4 or 5 years, so he's making 5.4, so let's say he's making 10.8. He'll only earn slightly more than the Cards are paying Steven Matz and free agent to be Jordan Montgomery. So when you look at that scenario, Jordan Montgomery is probably the more likely pitcher to get moved out of St. Louis. So it's makes sense. Well, why do that? If you're going to pay Matz that kind of money, it's a steal if you're paying Jack Flaherty that kind of money. More realistically, though, St. Louis could offer an AAV of, let's say, $18.5 million. Which is the amount that comes off the books when Adam Wainwright retires at the end of it. And they'll certainly feel better paying $20.4 million a year, which is the amount of money they're paying Miles Michaelis. 34-year-old Miles Myers. Now, Michaelis still has 2 years left in his contract, and that's at a bargain at $17.6 million each year through 2025. But Flaherty is special. He's gotten better and gone deeper into games with virtually every start since June. There was a time, not as far back as you think, is going back to 2021, where Jack Flaherty was considered one of the best starting pitchers in the National League. And he appears to be healthy again. So if John Mozeliak is serious about committing to pitching, why go all in on the unknown and keep some money aside for what the team knows they have in Jack Flaherty? He is my untouchable Redbird pitcher, if you will. So we went a little longer than we usually do, and I just realized I didn't change my hats off of my Cincinnati Red hat. But just to prove that I was ready, I've got my Brewers cap, and I dropped my Pirates and my Cardinals hat, but I do have them. So I could easily have put the hats on as all of the GM for this episode. But the trade deadline is still in front of us. This was a fun little exercise to determine who we would feel if we were in a GM seat, whether it be with the Cubs, with the Reds, with the Brewers, with the Cardinals, with the Pirates, wherever team we would be sitting, who we would pick as our untouchables. And we would love to hear from you in the days and weeks ahead on this particular topic. Once again, you can send emails to slasherbaseball@yahoo.com. You can reach out on social media at slasherbaseball, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on Instagram, whether it be on Thread at @slasherbaseball. That's all you need to remember to reach out to us and comment on any of the episodes. Please go to slashersports.com for information not only on Central Intelligence, but on our new American League podcast, AL Slash Lines. That's going to be coming up every weekend. A new episode will drop this Sunday. I'm sure we'll probably talk some trade deadline stuff for American League teams as well. I am your host, Special Agent in charge of National League Central Affairs, Steve Beck. We'll be back again next Thursday with some more files to open here on Central Intelligence. We do welcome you to comment wherever you might be catching this podcast, whether it be YouTube, whether it be on the Spotify feed, or wherever else you might find it as a podcast. Please do hit a subscribe. Please do hit a like. Please do let us know what you're thinking. This show is a conversation with all of you, and we want to hear your points of view, even if we don't agree. And I would imagine in this conversation from today's show, we're not going to agree about a lot, but even if we don't agree, we can agree that your team, if you're a National League Central fan, is probably going to do something that we're going to talk about on the next episode of Central Intelligence.